Okay, so let's move on to the next exercise. A function that returns a value is equal. I wonder if this is an exercise where we actually have a little bit of code that we can look at. Let's try to examine that by looking at the scripts we have for Vec3. And remember that if you don't have this script, you need to look at the instructions that are going to be available online that Morten will upload about how to get exercise 03. But that it doesn't look like we have any script here that's reminiscent of what we are supposed to need here. So I'm just going to ignore the scripts for now and focus on the problem. So what we're supposed to do? We will implement a function that returns a result instead. So we're supposed to write this function and check it for different combinations of A, B, and C. I wonder what C is doing. I don't know. This exercise is actually confusing me a little bit right now. Okay. Well, let's try to write the function and play around with it. We can always do that. Okay. So in this case, I'm going to leave this little Python terminal interpreter thing here alone. And I'm going to work with a script because I really don't like to work with this for longer programs at all. I by far prefer to work with scripts, and I think most, I wouldn't call myself like a super experienced programmer, but I think most programmers have the same preference. So actually I guess I am an experienced programmer at this point, but that's mostly because I'm old. Okay, so let's call this is equal, damn it, pi, because the name is a little bit arbitrary, and then let's try to write the function. So what is this function supposed to do? It's supposed to compute whether it's supposed to do this stuff. So let's just start to write it. It's called is equal. So we start by writing def because that's how we write function. And then we say is equal a comma b. And I'm just going to implement it because it's easier to explain what it does after we implemented it, and we can anyway see what it's supposed to be here. So it's given two input arguments a and b, and then we say if a is equal to b, then we have this new keyword that I'll explain in a moment, and it's supposed to return yes, and else is supposed to return no. Okay, now what I do is that I save this script, and the way you save script in PyCharm, like notice there's no little friendly oopsie-doopsie, there's no little friendly save icon here, so you're actually supposed to type Control plus S. And the unfortunate thing is that experienced programmers are so used to pressing Control S that we do it all the damn time, because when you don't press Control S, the script is not updated, so then when you run it, it doesn't recognize your changes. And that's why you learn to press Control S all the time, and you forget that new programmers like you are not that familiar with pressing this command like obsessively, and that is very confusing. So we're really sorry about that. We should have been much more clear about this as well. But you press Control S and it saves, and you can even see that there was a little asterisk here, or a little dot, sorry. And when I press Control S, it disappears to indicate that now it is saved. Okay, so now I've written this function. Let's try to see what it does by just running it. Nothing happened. This command is just Python saying that I use Python to run this script, and then nothing happened. So that was a little bit disappointing. Why? Is my script broken? Let's try to do that. Is it broken? Well, let's see what happens now. And I just press Control S. I can't even stop myself. I'm just doing it all the time. Okay. So now it actually prints out what I have down here. Okay, so what's going on here? What's going on when I run this script is that Python begins to read the file. It sees there is a function, and then it says, okay, yourself, there is a function. Just recognize there is a function. But the function itself is just a definition. It's like not doing anything on its own if it's just defined. Then the next thing Python does is that it says, oh, there's a blank line. I'm just going to skip that. And then it sees the print statement, and then it prints out this output. And that's why I see this output and nothing else. So how do I call this function? Well, I have to actually call it myself. I have to say is equal and then let's call it with something. So let's call it with 9 and 3. I guess in that case they're not equal. And then let's try to print out what it is, like this. Okay, so now let's see what happens. And I just saved it again. It says no. Wait, so what's going on here? When Python encounters this line, first it encounters the function definition, and then it sort of stores the function definition inside Python's memory. Then it encounters this line. The first thing it does is that it evaluates what's inside the print statement. The print statement says call the function is equal, and Python says, oh yeah, I know what that is. The first argument is 9, the second argument is 3. So then it calls the function, and what happens is that Python says a is equal to 9 and b is equal to 3, like this. Then it performs this check, a is equal to b, that's going to be false. So it says, I'm not going to do what's in here, instead I'm going to do what's in here. Then it encounters the return statement, and that's a new one. What the return statement says is that this whole expression should actually be no. In other words, I end up with print no here, because this whole thing is relevant to this return statement that says return no, and then the no pops out, and this statement is like replaced with no, and then I get to print no, and print no is just no. So I can actually do a couple of different things here. I can say return 92. And what do you think is going to happen? What's going to happen now? Let's try. It prints out 92. And that's because they are still not equal. They have the same value. So now it returns 92, and then effectively what it ends up doing is that it's going to end up printing out 92. And that looks like this in the terminal. So that's how you use the return statement. And the return statement is super important in functions, because up until this point, the only thing our functions has been able to do is to print out stuff. But this allows our functions to output other things, and then we can take that other thing and we can put it into a new function. So let's try to do something a little bit crazy. Let's say you go back to doing what you did before, and I save it. And then we say, we first print out is equal 9 and 3, and then we say is equal 9, 3. Again, but now I take this and I put it into is equal again, like this. And then I give it a new argument like this, 3. Okay, so what's going to happen here? Let's just try to run it. No. The first one evaluates to no, and the second one actually ends up being no as well. So why? Well, that's because behind the scene, what Python is doing is that it first evaluates this innermost expression. This innermost expression evaluates to no. And then what I get is this. It's a little hard. Then what I get is actually this stuff. No and 3. Okay, so what happens when this is evaluated? Well, no, A will be equal to no, and B will be equal to 3. So what I actually have here is a situation that looks like this. Okay, it looks really strange, but let's see what happens. So it encounters this if statement, and then it says is no equal to 3. Well, this is a text string, this is the number 3. These two are not equal. We can in fact just check that by just starting Python and then saying no equal to 3. That's false. So this is still false. So it jumps into the second fork of this if statement, and then it says return no. Return no. That means that this whole thing is replaced by no. So now I get print no. And that's why it's equal to no in the terminal before. So I'm just going to remove this by commenting it out. This little thing here, this fence, it means that it's a comment that results in Python just ignoring it. And I should probably have said that, but I think the book mentions that as well very early on. So that's why when I run it, No. Okay, so what happens if I do this? Let's try. Yes. Okay, so why did that happen? Well, the same thing we saw before happens. I first pop in is equal, and that value is to no. So what I actually end up with is this no and no. Well, in this case, this is put into is equal. So A is equal to no, B is equal to no. So in that case, we have no equals no, and that's true. So it says return yes, and that means that this whole thing simply reduces to print yes, and that's why we see yes in the terminal. So this is how basically functions work and how you can string together functions. Then I noticed that the exercise asked us to do one other thing, namely to store the output of a function in a variable, and we can do that. So let's define a variable. Let's just call it res for result, and res is equal to 3 and 9, because we are not so creative anymore. And then let's try to print out this like this. So what happens when I run this? It's no. Why? Well, that's because this line, I still evaluate is equal. It goes down here, return no. That means that effectively I end up having res equal to no. So now res is just the text string no, and then it prints out no. And that's why we get no in this case. And you can verify that by putting in 3. And it's going to be yes. And in fact, you can do all sorts of weird things here, like this. In order for this to work, I have to import the math module, because otherwise I can't say math.anything. In this case, it's going to be yes, because pi is in fact equal to itself, so I get it out yes here. Okay, that's all I have to say about this exercise, and now we hopefully get into something a little bit more interesting. So thanks for your attention.